Hey, before you make up your mind about the Minneapolis ICE shooting, there's one fact you almost certainly haven't heard. The agent who pulled the trigger had already been dragged more than 100 yards by an illegal immigrant last year, nearly killed during a traffic stop. That changes everything because this story isn't just about what happened this week, it's about what politicians said, what they encouraged, how rhetoric turned a volatile moment into a deadly one. Stay with me because once you hear the full context, the headlines won't look the same. So here's where we're headed with this. We talked a lot over the past 48 hours about the fatal shooting in Minneapolis involving an ICE agent and a woman named Renee Good. It has sparked immediate outrage, protest, political outrage, protest of political condemnation, especially from local leaders in the Minneapolis area. But what hasn't been talked about, nearly enough, I believe, is who this agent is and what he's already been through on the job. And once you hear that part of the story, the picture looks very different. So let's jump in. Here's what we know. According to the New York Post, the ICE agent involved in Wednesday's shooting is a 10-year veteran of the agency. He was nearly killed last year during a routine enforcement stop in Bloomington, Minnesota. Last June, federal agents stopped a man named Roberto Carlos Munoz, an illegal immigrant from Guatemala with a long criminal record that included domestic assault and sex crimes involving a minor. Now, when officers attempted to remove Munoz from his vehicle, he refused. An agent broke the back window to gain access, and that's when Munoz floored it. The agent's arm became trapped inside the car. Munoz didn't stop. He didn't slow down. According to prosecutors, he weaved back and forth, trying to shake the agent loose, dragging him more than 100 yards down the road. That's a football field. The agent was hospitalized with severe injuries to his arm, his hand. He required more than 30 stitches. Photos later showed deep gashes and blood-soaked bandages. He survived, but barely. And last month, the illegal, Munoz, was convicted in federal court for assaulting that very officer. That's not ancient history. That's just last year. So let's fast forward to this week. That same agent finds himself in another chaotic encounter, this time surrounded by a hostile crowd as federal officers attempt to carry out an immigration enforcement. During the confrontation, again involving a car, Renee Good drove her vehicle toward him. Video footage appears to show her car clipping the agent before ignoring commands to stop. The agent jumped clear and fired. 3 shots, one was fatal. Now, immediately, the narrative became federal agent shoots woman. But context does matter, folks. That context includes the fact that this officer already knows personally what happens when you hesitate, when you assume a car won't be used as a weapon, when you give the benefit of the doubt in a moment that turns violent, you could lose your life. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said the agent acted in self-defense, calling the crowd a group of agitators attempted to interfere with lawful enforcement. If you watch the videos, and there are many of them out there, you know that. You see what happened. President Donald Trump echoed that assessment, saying the officer was justified after being struck by the vehicle. Meanwhile, we have this clown Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey telling federal agents to get the you-know-what out of his city, rejecting DHS's account of events outright. And Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, who previously referred to ICE agents as modern-day Gestapo, has spent years framing federal immigration enforcement as inherently dangerous and illegitimate. Words matter. Rhetoric matters. When you repeatedly demonize law enforcement officers as villains, don't be surprised when tensions escalate on the street. We've seen this over and over. We've seen this movie before, and we know how it ends. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth that a lot of our politicians don't want to say out loud. ICE agents aren't operating in a quiet office, in controlled environments. They're making stops in the neighborhoods where crowds gather, where misinformation spreads almost instantly, where officers are surrounded by people who believe, rightly or wrongly, that stopping enforcement is a moral duty. That's not policing under normal conditions. That's policing in a pressure cooker that can explode at any moment. Vehicles are no longer just vehicles. Law enforcement across the country has learned the hard way that cars are frequently used as weapons, as we saw this week. Officers are trained accordingly because too many of them have been killed or maimed standing where they thought they were safe. The agent knows that better than most. He knows it under those particular circumstances. So, let me say this very clearly because nuance matters. A woman is dead. That's very tragic. No family wakes up expecting that outcome. But it's also true that officers are not required to sacrifice their lives to satisfy political optics. You agree? Self-defense law doesn't reset because a situation is politically sensitive. It doesn't disappear because a crowd is watching, and it certainly doesn't vanish because a mayor doesn't like federal policy. If a car is coming at you after you've already been dragged down a street once in your career, you don't get infinite chances to hope it turns away. You're going to react a bit differently than maybe that officer who has not been dragged across a football field. This shooting didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened amid a deliberate campaign by local and state officials to obstruct federal law enforcement, to declare sanctuary policies, and publicly vilify the agents tasked with enforcing that law. The law that you and I voted in 2024 to send Donald Trump back to the Oval Office to enforce. You can't tell officers they're not welcome. You can't call them fascists. You can't encourage resistance and then act shocked when encounters become volatile. That's not leadership. That's negligence, and we've seen that from the mayor all the way to the governor's office. Tim Walz, when he says it's patriotic to get out and protest, he is encouraging that continued violence. This case will be investigated, as it should be. That's how the system works. But if we're going to have an honest conversation about what happened, it has to include all the facts, not just the ones that fit a protest chant or a press conference soundbite. The ICE agent involved is not a cartoon villain. He's a federal officer who was nearly killed last year doing his job, put in that very same circumstances that he found himself in just this week. He was faced with another split-second decision this week. He chose to survive to protect himself. You can debate immigration policy all day long. You can argue about enforcement priorities. But if we strip officers of the right to defend themselves in dangerous situations, then we're not talking about reform. We're talking about abandonment. And that's a line this country does not want to cross. I don't think. Do you? Text me, email me, Joey at joeyhudson.com.